Hey y'all, this is your girl BMORE and welcome to the Dummies Cauldron.
Hey, it's your girl BMORE, and we are about to do something a little new. Maybe I'll call it the weekly roundup. Who knows? But we will be going over the weekly transits just in like a group thing about, a couple times a month. And I wanted to discuss what will be going on from the 1st to the 7th. And so this week, I feel like a quote from Chris Jami, which is an author, kind of really sums it up. The theme of this week is about self-expression. What to say is half of the battle. And I think that kind of really pinpoints a lot of the things that we will be going through during the course of the week. So in the background, we have the chart from the 1st and then the chart from the 7th, which is the last day of the week. And so we will be getting into a couple of things. I see a lot of things that really center around Venus and Mercury. And since Venus is the planet of pleasure, it is the planet of socialization and relationships, but it's also the planet that helps us to convey or implies things, to take people from one place to another. So sometimes it's vehicles, literally cars, and then sometimes it's, artistic displays that take us from one place to another, or we're on kind of like a voyage. The other thing with Mercury deals with obviously travel, but it also really deals with the idea of speech, how we communicate, but also exchanges. Now, Mercury is sometimes called the arguing star, or the fight that has like a fighting type of lean to it, because a lot of people can get into arguments with Mercury, and that can be a bit tricky. So we have speech and self-expression issues this week. And we really will be spending a lot of time trying to figure them out. So, on the 1st, we have Venus and Chiron conjuncting. And here we'll be dealing with themes around trying to heal or process art, pleasure in our relationships. Maybe we are trying to heal dynamics with the wife, because Venus is seen as the planet that rules the wife. It's seen as a planet that deals with forms of ideas and feelings and communication. And so maybe we are trying to process these things or teach people about them. We can also have themes centered around kidneys, women, hormones, and balancing, trying to come into wholeness and homeopathy. And that's really important because Venus is not necessarily the strongest in Aries. And so any type of help that it can kind of get to try to stabilize or try to fly straight as much as possible would be beneficial. And it's going to do this right before it goes into Taurus. And so there's something here where we have to understand what our wounds are, or what's kind of really going on with Venus in our forms of self-expression, and how much are we in contemplation. How much can we bridge a gap from what's real and what isn't real. So maybe we realize, like, you know what, maybe my relationships could improve, or you know what, maybe my body is a little bit out of whack. Maybe I need to go heal it. I need to go process. I need to go do certain things for it. We also get homeopathy. Chiron is a object that rules homeopathy. And so maybe people are more open to taking into more homeopathic versus allopathy or allopathic cures, like more home remedies to fix whatever is going on with their physical health, or even in their relationships, or with money. So on the 2nd, 3rd, somewhere between there, we start to move into the first quarter moon. And so I know I've discussed new moons, full moons, etc., and they happen about within 12 to 14 days of each other. So the new moon happens, and in 12 to 14 days the full moon happens. But in between the new moon and full moon, and then from the full moon to the next new moon, we get quarters. Okay. And so we're experiencing our first quarter moon. And so whatever we started on around the 26th, it is meeting its first challenge. This is why I really stressed the importance of making sure we have things that is grounded in reality and that makes sense, because the moon is going to move into Virgo. And so Virgo at its best really doesn't stand well for corruption. Virgo has a very strong, deep desire to purify things or to try to rearrange things into certain orders. And that desire for rearranging into orders is out of, to some extent, a level one could argue is purity. But the thing is with K2 being there, K2 rules sometimes certain forms of injury or sometimes even obstacles. K2 is also seen as a liberator. And so maybe it wants to liberate people from purifying or becoming clean, becoming focused. And so now we get the moon coming in, and the moon gives us emotions, habits. It gives us dynamics with the mother. It gives us sleep. And also the moon can give us joy, just as Venus can give us joy. So contentment can come from the moon, it can come from Mercury, and it can also come from Venus. And so here with K2 and the moon coming together, we get some dynamics where people could be disassociating. There could be some like depression, issues with eating, issues with habits following through, issues with the mother, the family. But we also can get knowledge and become more self-informed. And we also can get spiritual or psychic insights on how to improve. And that's why I told you on the 26th, if we're going to start anything, if we're feeling ambitious about anything, it's very, very much so important that we understand what is required of the undertaking. Because by default, when we start these tasks or start going after our desires or dreams or whatever, by default, there's going to be some uninformed optimism. There's going to be some uninformed, almost like innocence that we're approaching things with. Okay. So when things like that happen, we want to make sure that what we don't know is minimized as much as we can by being practical, being realistic, and doing a little bit, maybe a little research, seeing, what the pros and cons of stuff is before we just jump out the gate doing everything. And if you haven't done that, well, Virgo was going to give that to you. Virgo was going to put that really right in your face. The other thing is here when the moon is in Virgo, outside of it having like a strong intellectual pull, sometimes I notice with these like combos like here, like that here, I notice that there can be sometimes a extra level of restlessness, irritability, and so really try to stay the course of whatever you're doing. Be mindful of not being too overly nitpicky and critical. Like, yes, we need to be diligent about what we're doing, why, and being intentional and mindful. But I think we should more so figure out on being, like I said, intentional, but being overly nitpicky, overly critical, being in a space where maybe we're moving into pessimism. And so maybe we move into informed pessimism versus just analyzing, reassessing, and figuring out what we need to do. Figuring out how to make the situation better. All right. I will also recommend, if you wanted to do a little bit more deep diving, if you go back into the video I did for part 2 of that new moon in Gemini, go back and listen to the section where I talked about where the Virgo portion would be at. And that is where you probably need to pay a little bit of attention to. All right. So if you go back to where I did all like the risings and all of that stuff, go back to that video, listen to where I had all of the stuff at, and then see where you had Virgo at. So this house going into this house and that house going into that house. Listen to the Virgo portion, because it's very important we understand from there what we're missing, because it'll be easier to get past whatever little obstacle and hiccups that we're having around the 2nd and 3rd. Then we get to the 4th. And so the 4th, we have Venus sextiling Jupiter. And so here we're dealing with the idea of ethics. How graceful are we? Charitability. How sympathetic are we? Imagination. And you really could be a people person. You're very outgoing, you're very affectionate, and this is very relaxing, which basically increases your popularity. The good thing here is that you know your life direction, you know your aims, and the thing that also comes with this is it can be a little bit of indulgence and laziness. And so try to be very mindful of not doing that and being able to seize the opportunity as it comes. This is good for money makers, or being good in making money or favorable circumstances. The other con is that you can also be a spender. So just as quickly as maybe you make money, you spend money. This is also good for successful partnerships. Some people can have many lovers. And this is overall a sense of luck and ease and favorability. But I also would say, yes, it's good to go after aims. Yes, it's good to have things go in your favor. But I will also say luck and wishes isn't a long-standing thing. It isn't permanent and it doesn't last always. And so when we get an opportunity, we should try to take advantage of it as much as possible, because sometimes wishes don't come true. Sometimes the well runs dry. So I think we should take what we can get and be practical. On the 5th, Mercury squares Rahu, and so we can see the idea of a lot of disturbances come up. So we can have issues with children, education, intelligence, speech, commerce, buying, trading, or things that we exchange with one another. Vocation, so people's life calling, their career. But we also see things with adaptability. And so some of these challenges can show up as like diseases, psychic disturbances, collective trends, and just hit kind of like craziness that kind of just bubble up, on like a global or large scale. We also can see issues with travel, issues with service, maybe pets, issues with like home life, so the neighborhood, siblings, etc. So I would really try to take it easy with Rahu, because it can be just a lot of confusion. No one really knows anything. Maybe someone's not being as truthful, or even if they're not being intentionally misleading, there's just a lack of directness and just all over the place and confusion. So keep that in mind. On the same day, Mercury squares Mars. And so people can have a strong mind, and it is good for learning and doing things that are practical. Some people can be more perceptive, trustworthy, and brave. So we can also detect weaknesses in others, which I think will be helpful when you are approaching people with that Mercury square Rahu. So it's easier for us to just see what the vibe is and see if someone's just being a little bit off. And that way we can make more wiser decisions. Because at its best, Mars can give us good logic. And so we can use the intellect of Mercury and the logic of Mars to make smart decisions. We also can be a very convincing debater. You can be very dramatic, creative, very much so into literature and crafts. And we see themes of like reporters, politicians, people who deal with the public. Even if you don't have any, this can also be a good transit for people who deal with children, or work with children or have children as well. We also see themes around customer service, having to sell ideas or participate in meetings. So if we have to do like discussions, etc. Because there's a stronger level of patience that you can have with others. And there's a stronger level of patience that you have with others when brainstorming and figuring things out. And this is also good for financial planning. On June 6th, we have Mercury making a positive aspect to Chiron. And so again, we see Chiron pop its little head back up. And so we see healing conversations, learning, and maybe we're learning what we need to do to heal, learning, maybe processing, being able to process information better, maybe being able to speak better. There could be also things that we are able to fix or heal from childhood experiences, or being able to adapt better with career and maybe our reputation. And we may even just come up with a very brilliant idea as well. So that, plus it will be really good for travel. Now that is the end of the weekly transits. In the next video, I will be discussing the impacts of Venus. Venus will be going towards the end of the week. It will be going into Taurus, which is its domicile. And so we'll have Venus in Taurus while also having Mercury in its ruler too. And so we'll be experiencing that along with some other things. I feel like the theme for next week is, I guess the best way I can say it is kind of can say maybe the idea of the loss of innocence, and I will explain why. I don't want you guys to get really, really, really freaked out, but I will explain why the next week from the 8th to the 14th, I named it the loss of innocence. And what does that mean? You know, loss of innocence, coming of age, and why I named it that. But in order for me to get into the 8th to the 14th, I'm going to make a whole nother little video or clip talking about Venus going into Taurus and its behaviors and how we can make the best out of Venus. All right. Okay, guys, be safe and bye.